Recently, I was helping my sister-in-law Jessica, who is a new garment knitter, navigate Ravelry. I was showing her pattern pages, notes, modifications, yarn substitutions, all that sort of thing. And what struck me was her initial reaction upon discovering that all of this information was available. Now, I'm not talking about what you can find on a Ravelry pattern page that's put out by the designer. I'm talking about all of the really amazing, useful nuggets of information that are provided by the knitters. And her reaction was as if I just showed her a trove of hidden treasure. Like, wait, all of this information is just here for me to benefit from? Yeah. It is. And that's really cool because, like I said, some of the most useful information on Ravelry is not even necessarily on the designer's pattern page at all, but within the stories and experiences and observations of the knitters and makers on the platform. My name is Taylor, and today I want to share with you a realization that I had while I was wrapping up, and am currently wrapping up my Terrazzo sweater, also subsequently putting together my project page over on Ravelry for this sweater. Now, before we get started, I should probably clarify that I don't habitually keep Ravelry pages. In fact, my Ravelry is woefully uncurated. I mean, there's photos in there of projects I finished, but some of the projects that I have finished still show up as being works in progress. I just don't give it the attention that it needs, deserves, or could benefit other people on Ravelry. And after talking to my sister and realizing just how important that information was or is going to be to her in her garment knitting and knitting experience in general, I realized that I probably need to step up my game a touch. And I'm definitely not going to retroactively go back and adjust the project pages for 10 years or more of projects that I have there on Ravelry. That's just not going to happen. But I am sitting here finishing up the second sleeve of my Terrazzo sweater, thinking about what information is actually useful to leave behind once I'm completely finished. Now, a lot of you here probably watched the conversation that I had with Jessica on the couch behind me back there a couple of episodes ago, where I essentially interviewed her, but we had a really fun conversation about her first sweater knitting experience. It's a great video, especially if you're a newer knitter, but even if you're a more advanced knitter and have somebody in your life who's a newer knitter, or if you just like listening to people talk about knitting in general, it's a great one. 2 episodes back, I'll link to it down below. And also, if you caught the window shopping episode over on the Patreon, we dove into this discussion in real time over there as well. At some point, I started showing her photos on Ravelry, showing her project pages of folks who have knit other patterns that we were discussing, telling her how I like to use Ravelry project pages to check for pattern notes, to look for modifications, yarn substitutions, fit observations. And all of this for Jessica was like discovering a treasure trove. And that's when the wheels in my mind started to turn about what all of this really means and the inherent value of all of it to beginner knitters in particular, but all knitters in general. Watching someone who is still relatively new in their garment knitting journey find so much value in something that I have sort of been taking for granted for so long really had me stop and reconsidering the whole thing myself. Because, like I said, it also had me realizing how much that I have benefited from all of those observations, notes, and project pages over the years without really contributing much of it myself. And I know I talk all about the projects that I complete and work on and the experiences I have in my observations here on the channel, and I do that ad nauseum, is that the word? I exhaust all of that here on the channel, but not everybody watches YouTube. Not everybody wants to watch a video. Some people want to find that information in the project pages right over there on Ravelry. I don't just want to leave a link to a video, and I have done that in the past. And this is not me suggesting that anybody owes anybody project notes on Ravelry. Absolutely not. If all you have on Ravelry is the word finished and a photo of your finished sweater, that is absolutely fine. And if you don't even have a Ravelry, that is also absolutely fine. I'm just sharing that there is value in the information that people choose to include on their project pages. And some of that value, as it relates to me and how I'm approaching leaving information behind for my Terrazzo, led me to something that you may have experience with or thoughts on, and that is the difficulty rating of a particular project. Because as I was updating the project page and I got to that section, I immediately thought, I have no idea what to put there. There's options like easy peasy or a piece of cake, easy, medium, difficult, and impossible. Impossible. I don't know if impossible should be one of the categories. Who's going to use that? I feel like It's just an interesting thing to choose to add to the difficulty rating. Okay, that's besides the point. And the reason why it was hard for me to answer that question, and is difficult for me to answer that question, even though that I have done it, I've come up with a way that I can answer that question, is because I'm not sure I understand what the question actually means. And it causes me to also wonder if the people creating the question, asking the question on the platform, really know what it is that they're asking. How difficult was the sweater? Well, compared to what? And for whom? Because I'm rating the sweater based on my experience now. I have 15 years of knitting experience and I have several garments under my belt. And if that's what I'm basing this on, then that's one answer. But if I'm thinking about someone approaching their first sweater, or even in the case of my sister-in-law, her second garment, that's another answer entirely. And then I realized that when we talk about difficulty, we might not all be talking about the same thing, because when you discuss your experience with something, whether it's difficult, whether it's engaging, whether it's boring, what have you, all of those observations that you're making are what we like to call subjective. Take this sweater, my Terrazzo. The techniques aren't particularly difficult. And if you want to read my review, I will link to the project page down below. And I'll talk more about it once it is completely finished. This is not a finished object video, even though I am using Gladys here to showcase my sweater. It's missing one sleeve. I want to take a break from today's video to tell you a little bit about my sponsor. First and foremost, it is the lovely folks over on Patreon who help support the channel, but I am also the owner and dyer of Fiber for the People Yarn, a hand-dyed yarn business where I dye natural yarns from my home studio here in Southern Nevada. My current collection in the shop now is called Dusty Vinyl. It is part of my summer series called Analog Warmth, where I am appreciating and honoring everything that is analog and lovely and not connected to digital media, and I love it. The Dusty Vinyl collection included 2 new variegated colorways coming to the shop. This is called B-Sides, and this is called Vintage Sleeves. 2 gorgeous colorways on 100% non-superwash 2-ply merino rambouillet sport weight yarn that is local to me from my home state of Nevada. Thank you so much for supporting all the work that goes into producing content here on the Wool Needles Hands channel. All jokes aside, I am a sponsor-free channel. I sponsor my own work with my own creative work, and I am sponsored by the folks over on the Patreon who provide additional support over there, and it means a great deal to me. Okay, thank you so much. Back to the video. In this sweater project, there are certainly things that a newer knitter is going to need to learn. But it's not a lace masterpiece. It's not a Shetland lace shawl. It's not some wildly technical garment. What I found interesting about this was the construction. The yoke of this sweater is started flat. The neckline is shaped before joining in the round. I've called this a staggered start neckline in the past. You can call it a flat yoke. It's a really interesting way to start a neckline. And the more that I've done sweaters like these, the more that I realize I prefer this particular style of neckline. But it's more involved. In fact, it is the same style of neckline as Jessica's sweater, the 90s pullover that she knit and we talked about in that video, that she did in that sweater. And that was the single hardest, most difficult part of that experience for her. There's also multiple increase sections happening within the yoke. You really have to trust the process a lot, and I enjoyed that, but that's construction. That's different from technique. Then there's attention. The yoke required focus. I was paying attention to where I was, checking instructions, following along carefully, so I knew that I was increasing and creating all the raglan shaping where it needed to be when it needed to be. Once I separated for the body of the sweater, it was a completely different experience. That became wonderful television or watch my husband play video game knitting. Wonderful audiobook knitting. I just started listening to the audiobook for True Grit, and I absolutely love listening to that while working on the more, I don't know, you can call them mindless, I guess, rhythmic sections where it's just lots and lots of stockinette. The sort of knitting where you just settle into the rhythm and keep going. Which brings me to something else entirely. And for some folks, what I'm just now talking about in terms of all of that stockinette can lead to another challenge. And this was a challenge for me as well, which is why this sweater got set down, I don't know, for about 6 months. And that is endurance. We don't talk about this enough when it comes to coming up with like difficulty levels for particular projects, but this is, in my opinion, a really big factor in how you would rate the difficulty of a garment. And I do think that we kind of get onto some kind of, I don't know, like notion or high horse that when we're talking about sweater or project difficulty, that we're talking about technique and construction and how literally difficult it is for us to complete the task with our hands and our brains. And a big part of what goes into completing a task is sticking with it and committing to the process. And when you have something that is just a lot over and over and over again, that repetition, the seas of stockinette, as some people like to call it, that requires a lot of endurance. Like a marathon requires more endurance than a sprint. And so in this particular sweater, and I would say this is what made the no frills sweater by PetiteKnit also more challenging despite being a very simple design, is the fact that it requires a lot of endurance. There are projects that are difficult because they're complicated. There are projects that are difficult because it's a lot of the same thing without a lot of anything taking away from the tedium. In fact, I made an entire video early on in the process of making this sweater about how this is some of the most tedious knitting I have done, comparing it to my no frills. And even considering that, the question remains, would I knit it again and would I recommend it? And we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. Complicated and long aren't the same kind of challenge. So that's where I find myself sitting here trying to determine how difficult is this sweater. I want to complete my Ravelry project page the way that I should. I want to draw the little bar across where it needs to be. Where does that put me? Because whether a person should use the difficulty rating or not to determine if a pattern or a project is for them is up to that person, but it is undeniable that people do use things like that from time to time. Now, I'm a big reader. My husband and I have a channel here on BookTube where we talk about books that we're reading. We use apps like Goodreads and Fable and Storygraph and all of this to determine books that we're going to read, keep track of books we have read, but also to see how people like the books that we are thinking about reading. And there's like star ratings and all of this. And we just did a video on our channel about the subjectivity and, all of that goes into rating a book with stars. And I think that, yes, in the knitting world, we're probably not relying on things like that when it comes to determining whether or not we should knit a pattern. And maybe it's because we know that there's so much that goes into this and that relying on one person's star rating or a little bar that goes across and talks about how, technically difficult it is not a great indicator. We like to dive into the perspectives of the people and the observations of the people, which is partly what I'm discussing here today in terms of the value of those kinds of things. You can't help but acknowledge that people are going to look at that difficulty bar, especially if you're using an app like Ravelry, where it's right there. I want to say it's above the price or below the price of the project or the pattern. It's right there. And when you see something that to you initially looks like something you can approach, but you see a difficulty rating of really high or maybe even really low, it might cause you to pause ever so slightly. And so if I'm embarking on taking my pattern and project pages on Ravelry more seriously, I want to complete the difficulty rating. I just want to know what it is that I'm saying when I say that something is of medium difficulty. Because if the sweater is a 3 out of 5 in difficulty or medium difficulty, what have I even told you? Not much. But if I tell you that the construction was engaging, the yoke required attention, the body of the sweater made for really great television knitting, and that it asked for a fair amount of commitment, that endurance point that I was making earlier, now we're getting somewhere useful. Now we're talking about the actual experience. And I think that's where this circles back to project notes. I promise, I have a through line here because I don't think that project pages are valuable because they provide information. I think they're valuable because they provide context. When I read project pages, I'm not looking for certainty. Not really. I'm not trying to determine whether a pattern is objectively difficult or easy. Nobody can give me that information. I'm trying to understand what the experience was like for someone else. And the more detailed photographs that I see of that someone else can help me really narrow down if my person is going to have a similar experience. This takes me to something that's kind of an offshoot of what I wasn't actually going to mention this, but photographs. Not everybody wants to leave photographs of themselves, and that is absolutely valid, and I totally get it. But if you do leave photographs, it does give a little bit more of a visual footprint for folks to look at. How often have you browsed Ravelry project pages to find somebody who looks like you in terms of your body shape? Just so that you can say, okay, well, she looks about, my size, my stature. You can never know. There's no guarantees here, but you can get close to understanding and then determining, well, if they did a size medium, maybe I could do a size medium and it would fit me. That's important context. And I don't mean to put pressure on people to put photos. I really don't mean to do that. But if you do put photos, you are helping a great deal of people more than you realize. I'm trying to understand what the experience was like for someone else so that I might have a better idea of what that experience is going to be like for me. The number or the little place on the bar that says medium, easy peasy, or impossible, that's not interesting to me, and it doesn't help. The story and the context behind that number or that rating is what helps. And I don't mean to say that we should abandon that little bar. Not really, because not everybody is going to leave an explanation for their difficulty rating. But it does make me think that if folks are taking their project pages seriously in the sense that they want to provide information that other people can use, explaining their difficulty rating or their enjoyment rating in the notes of the project page would be a really great start. Funny thing is that I started all of this by trying to figure out how difficult my Terrazzo sweater was for me. Or maybe this started when Jessica's eyes lit up when I showed her what is the Ravelry project page collection for any particular pattern. And I guess somehow I started thinking about the value of project notes instead. I talk about project pages here on the channel all the time, and I've always found value in them. However, I'm realizing that that value is much bigger than just a place to go to see how a garment's going to look on a body similar to your own. It's a community of knitters and fiber artists sharing what they've learned and the stories around their creations. And I've benefited from those more times than I can count. And probably so have you. And so will Jessica. So like I said, while I won't be going back and updating every project I've ever uploaded onto Ravelry, I do think I'd like to leave behind a few more breadcrumbs moving forward. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What information do you share on your Ravelry project page if you have or keep Ravelry project pages at all? Or is there somewhere else where you are sharing this information? I know there are still fiber art blogs out there or even Instagram accounts or what have you where folks are sharing information. What do you share? How do you rate the difficulty of the garments and the pieces that you create? And what other kind of context do you provide to people? Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your day with me. Until next time, happy knitting, happy making, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon. Bye.